We had a meeting, when was the meeting? It was
2 weeks ago.
April 21st. And it was kind of an interesting meeting. We started out going through, Hillary did an outstanding job going through the zoning practices in neighboring counties or counties that were relevant to what we were thinking about. And we all gave an acronym test at the end, and most everyone passed. SUP. Does everyone know? SUP.
Oh, special use permit.
You got it.
Lulu. Locally undesirable land use.
But it's but often those are, even though the names are different, the what's required is often the same. So an SUP is really like a CUP, which is what different jurisdictions call it. But we went through a lot of discussion about that, really trying to get a handle on what these different designations were and what they mean, to whether it's a legislative process, quasi-judicial, or anything like that. We did have some public input, which we had one public input at the beginning of the meeting, but most of the public input occurred during the course of the meeting. So I think those of you who were there realized it was more like a forum rather than a subcommittee meeting, but the questions were quite good. And the discussion was good. There was, I think a lot of goodwill, and there were good questions, good thoughts, and we tried to deal with it in terms of good answers. Sometimes we didn't have the answers, but I think most everyone who was there in the subcommittee, correct me if I'm wrong, thought it was a fairly enjoyable and productive process. And that's certainly the feeling I had when I left the meeting. Our next steps are going to be form two subcommittees of the subcommittee. I don't know what that means in terms of any requirements.
No, you can divide the task. You'll assign tasks.
Yeah, but I think the question is, you still have to make them public since it's a public subcommittee, don't
You
you?
can divide the task up between the members of the subcommittee.
And but that was one of my questions, actually, that those have to be public meetings. So we have to.
I think everything we do is public.
Yeah. So they have to be announced, 48 hours, because we have to set up those meetings for next week. So we'll do that after the meeting tonight and set those meetings up. One is a group to put together the pros and cons of a number of different options that we talked at length about in many different ways. One of the options is doing nothing. That's an option, doing nothing right now and waiting until the land use plan is done. Another option is doing traditional zoning across the county. Another option is doing traditional zoning on an interim basis in part of the county and open use zoning in another part of the county. Another option is interim zoning in part of the county and doing nothing in part of the county. And another option is doing open use zoning throughout the county. And so what we're going to do is, as a subcommittee, and that subcommittee is Jason will be working with myself, Bill, and Gene, will put together something for our next meeting. So we can go over those pros and cons of each of those different options. There may be other options that are emerged out of this too, but those are the ones that have kind of emerged so far from the discussions that we have. At some point, we have to start moving the ball down the road, and I think this will help us do that. The second was putting together a fact sheet, and this came out as a consequence of a lot of the questions and comments that people in the audience had. We had maybe 10 or 15 people there sitting there at the meeting. And what they would like to see is a published fact sheet about what the process is, where there will be opportunity for public comment, and we talked about it being a three-step process: the subcommittee, the planning board, the full planning board, and the board of commissioners, and what kinds of things are really relevant to their concerns. For example, we get a lot of questions about, well, if you have zoning, will I be able to timber my property? The answer is yes, because the agricultural practices such as timbering are exempt. But to put some of those key facts in a fact sheet that can actually be published in the Chatham Record or made available to anyone who wants it. And so we will be doing that with a subcommittee meeting with Jason, myself, and Caroline next week as well. And we'll have that done before our next subcommittee meeting, which is May 19th, I believe.
Yeah, not next Tuesday, but the Tuesday after.
Yeah. So we're going to try to have the subcommittee meetings on Monday, Tuesday, or Thursday, so whatever we put together can be distributed by Friday. I think that was one of the requests we had, to get the information out to the subcommittee is in a reasonable time frame, so they would have to have a chance to look at it, digest it, and think about it. The other issue that came up is that the chair, Esther Cohen, the chair of the Agriculture Advisory Board, is there, and she kind of proposed the idea of having a joint meeting between the Planning Board and the Ag Advisory Board at some point. We'll have to decide when that is, but that can be part of the sort of the open forum process, but it could be a step in the process, and I think that would be helpful to do. And I think most of the subcommittee members felt that would be a good idea. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Was that with the full planning board or the subcommittee of the planning board? I can't remember what we talked about, if it was the
We're talking about
subcommittee
the
meeting
subcommittee,
Yeah.
subcommittee and the ag.
and the ag.
Yeah.
I can't remember which it was, but I think it was the subcommittee.
Yeah. But it might be something that occurred with both.
Yeah,
exactly.
Nothing
Yeah.
wrong with
Yeah, I
happening more
don't
than
either.
once.
I can't remember what we talked about. Yeah.
Because the agricultural community obviously has a lot of concerns about the zoning issues, and it's important to see what those issues are, and if we did move to some kind of zoning, about getting a fairly complete list of accessory businesses that farmers use to make their budget each year, and to make sure that list is very complete and agreeable to the folks who are the farmers, who are the agricultural folks that we depend on. So that seemed like a good suggestion as well, and we will follow through with that suggestion.
I think it might be useful for the whole planning board to interact with the ag review board, but let's not do that until you've had a chance in your subcommittee to get these facts done and options and things of that sort. So we'll all be talking from the same piece of paper. But I think it might be a good idea to meet with the ag advisory board, because they're the ones that have the biggest question about all this.
I think it's clearly the agricultural community are the folks who have expressed the greatest concern. So that makes sense.
I had a short discussion the other day in the hallway with the chair of the Farm Bureau, who's President
Charles
Senator.
Lutterlow? Lutterlow? Charles Lutterlow?
Charles Lutterlow. And they'd be interested in participating in such a meeting as well. So perhaps the Ag Advisory Board and the Farm Bureau to meet with us to have that discussion. So, the more the better, in my opinion.
Yeah, I have met with the Farm Bureau before as a commissioner, and they're a good group. And,
Oh, yeah.
And there's some crossover, some people are on both, but that's okay.
Yeah. But they have a little bit different.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was just, his approach was, hey, we need to know what's going on. I mean, that's mainly the question.
And that's mainly what we're hearing
Yeah,
from
what's
people. People really don't know, even what zoning might mean for them. And so, and I think there's a lot of misinformation. And so there's I think the fact sheet is also, the purpose of it is to inform people.
Okay. We were in the hallway of a church, so I guess that was a good thing.
Well, I think the farming subcommittee, farm ag group, they don't have anything in June, so I think they were saying at least we weren't going to see them until at least July. So from a time frame,
Well, I don't think we need to rush in, but George's committee needs to, you know, one of the things that I'm a little bit concerned about is that without these things you're talking about, your meetings have been pretty much discussion amongst the people coming to the meeting, and your subcommittee has little time to really get some things down, so.
It's a mix of both.
Yeah.
I mean, the last
Yeah.
meeting probably was the most open forum that we've had, put it that way.
But you
I
still-
found that really
But you still
helpful.
need to have,
Yeah.
you still need to have the ability to get your work done.
Exactly.
But I think I think that was really important in helping us get our work done, because a lot of this stuff wasn't really being kind of aired out in a back and forth way. It was, people were saying something that might not have been accurate, and no one was responding to it in the public session. So I think it was really helpful to have the back and forth, and I think it can help inform what we do from here.
I have, Caroline put together notes from the meeting, here they are, that summarizes some of the things that were said.
So you're going to meet next on May the 19th.
Yeah, 2
But
weeks.
meanwhile, you're going to have some groups
Yes.
working.
Next week, we'll have the
Get some
subcommittee,
things
the
together.
subcommittees meeting, and then the week after, the full subcommittee meetings, and then
Yeah.
2 weeks later, the full planning board meetings.
I'm not sure, Jason, that those two sessions where people are trying to put things down into a fact sheet necessarily need to be open to the public. When you have the subcommittee meeting, then it is open to the public. But if you want to assign some tasks for people to do, I'm not sure that necessarily needs to be a public.
That's something
I don't know the
Chatham
answer.
County, yeah, we should drill down to a sub, is it truly a subcommittee at that point, or just a working group?
Does it have to do with the number of people that are in the meeting?
It depends on how it's established.
Yeah.
It just depends, I think, really on how it's established.
If it's less than half of your subcommittee, and you don't call it a committee, then I think you can do that, but I don't know.
It's clearly less than that.
I mean, each little group is less than half of the subcommittee, then you're not violating open meeting.
And I think it's something that they're going to bring back to the subcommittee as a whole
Well,
to
yeah,
discuss.
which is open.
So it's not,
Yeah,
In fact, I envision it maybe taking sections of going home and writing something. and bringing
exactly,
it
yeah,
back.
because I don't think we could do it all, yeah,
Which
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily need to be open.
yeah.
But when you do have a discussion about it, then that is an open meeting. But my 2 cents, I don't know the answer to that question you might want to ask.
I'll try with the county attorney.
I think you're right, but it'd be good to check it.
Just, ask what to do with it.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea to check, because if you don't, and that's another thing that
Oh, yeah.
the county's trying to hide from the citizens
Oh, yeah.
We
of
don't want
Chatham.
that.
Which we don't want to
We
do.
want to make sure that, yeah.
But you got to have time to write something down,
people just want to get something.
call homework.
Can I bring up a somewhat different issue for us to think about?
Yeah, are you done with your report?
If there are no more questions, I am.
I have a question.
Sure.
About both of the outputs, is the pro and con scenario and there's the fact sheet output.
Yes.
One of the things that's confused me is the context of it being an analysis of a temporary action or an analysis of a permanent action. So for example, you might have a form of zoning and you might say some of the pros of this form of zoning are blah, blah, blah. But those might be long-term characteristics. If it's a complex form of zoning, it might have a con that it might not be appropriate for interim period. And this concept of an interim period is perhaps the most sensitive topic that's come up. So I think that concept of the subcommittee's evaluation and the fact sheet, they can both hopefully approach that question of what is this concept of interim zoning and how does it relate to any potential general analysis of the impacts and pros and cons of zoning on the county. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I understand. I think it's a good point, that we have to realize that we have a land use plan process, and that may impact future zoning positions. So the interim zoning is kind of a hybrid, and it's be hard to express, but I think what you're saying is correct.
Okay. So the pros and cons of each type would be relative to the pro and con of that type as a
Yes.
temporary measure.
Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions, Joe? Okay, we would accept your report and be looking forward to the next meeting. Now, you have another issue?
Yeah, this is something that I've